Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. We have a really fascinating conversation coming up for you this evening, all about dyslexia and how to support students with dyslexia in schools. Really delighted to have two guests who I'm going to introduce in a moment. And before I get on to that, I would just like to give a shout out to one of our big sponsors this evening, John Catt Educational, who are leading publishers of professional development books and resources around the world. And you can grab a John Catt book from the John Catt Bookshop at johncattbookshop.com. And they have a whole section on SEND, and they have several books actually on dyslexia. So go check it out if you want to get more knowledge from leading off from this conversation. The reason I sort of fell upon this topic from a purely selfish point of view is obviously I currently teach 3 days a week, and my knowledge of this area is sketchy at best. And I feel like there's a whole world of things to explore. So that's really the reason why I arrived at going for this topic this evening. So without further ado, let's have a little chat to our guests. Dr. Helen Ross. Helen, do you want to introduce yourself really briefly to everybody?
I can do. Everyone reminds me that Dr. Ross spells dross. So, there is that. I am a dyslexia assessor. That's kind of my main, and dyslexia and dyscalculia. That's my main thing. I do also a lot of consultancy and research around the SEN space. So I'm really lucky. I get to do really cool stuff that's personally of interest and useful for teachers, and sometimes get paid for it. Very lucky.
That's epic. And we've had a comment in actually from Harvinder, who straight away said, Helen, you're amazing. Thank you so much for your work and research. There you go.
I don't know where to file that in my head. Thank you. That's really kind.
Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself as well for this evening's audience?
So my name's Lucy Pelling. I'm from Moonhall School, which is a specialist dyslexia school in Reigate in Surrey. I was head of SEN. I'm a SENCO by background, but I now run the Moonhall Assessment Centre in the UK, which offers all different kinds of assessments to any child from any background. And we also offer means-tested assessments for families that have limited affordability. I've also am the founding head of Moonhall Assessment and Learning Centre in Cairo.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. You both got a lot of stuff and a lot of expertise. So, Helen, let's start off then. I'll start with you first. What is dyslexia?
There's a very academic definition I'll give you, but I'm not going to do that because that's not very helpful. Basically, dyslexia is where your brain kind of wobbles with processing speech sounds, so your phonics and stuff, chopping words, changing them around, all the stuff that you do with kids in sort of early years, key stage 1, that stuff is tricky. And you've got wobbles in your working memory, so holding lists in your mind, holding spelling orders, holding word orders, that's tricky, and processing language. So it might be that kind of if people give you a whole load of stuff, they say it at you, you kind of be like, you what now? What? So it's kind of making sense of language information. Probably the most visible sides of it are in school when you spelling and you reading are a bit wobbly. But with littlies, it's with at any age, you can see it where people don't remember things in order. They don't remember instructions if they're older. Little kids can't remember days of the week. When certain people are sent to the shop, their husband has to send them a text message with what's been required from the shop. That's me. So yeah, it's around memory processing, stuff like that. Does that sound about right, Lise?
Yeah, I think, there are different, Helen's written a book about it, which I've got, but there are different signs at different ages. Obviously, we generally say you can't diagnose it until around the age of 7, because obviously children need that intervention. But I think sometimes we get parents, we get teachers, and you can kind of tell earlier than that. Like young children in a nursery, they might find learning nursery rhymes difficult, or they find it difficult to rhyme in a book. So Mrs. Cook read a and lots of children will say book because they know it rhymes with cook, but a dyslexic child might not get that onset and rhyme kind of ideas. And then, by the time children are 7, they're not interested in books. They find reading hard. They find spelling hard. The spelling test is, the dreaded weekly spelling test, but
and the whole body language, like kids can physically recoil. It's really sad to see, isn't it? Like,
yeah. So, I mean, I would say, from you can tell earlier, but, diagnosing it is 7 years plus.
They've just changed guidelines around that, actually. But there's, well, kind of ish. I haven't, one of my jobs for the summer, my professional body, SASC, which stands for something. SASC, I have specific, I don't know, SASC, Google it. It's words. SASC have sort of said that basically they're wanting assessments 8 and above unless you can show that loads of intervention has happened. So it's a little bit fuzzier now. When I've read over the summer, one of my jobs is to read all the guidelines really thorough. We'll have a chat, Lucy, about that, because I think there's things to consider. It's not hard and fast, but yeah, you can see earlier. Lucy's absolutely right. And by the time kids get to if I assess a lot of kids in secondary school, it's at the points of transition. So like year 6 to 7, there's that big ramp in work and everything's different. And by the time kids get to secondary school, dyslexia it absolutely is not just reading, spelling, writing. It's mental health, it's self-esteem, it's just overall well-being. Like it can be just all encompassing. My mental health's a bit pap, and I absolutely would say that that's because I've got dyslexia and just self-esteem was a bit rubbish at school. ADHD doesn't help, but it's all encompassing, and you don't grow out of it either. Like it doesn't go away.
I think you'll find a lot of people will have maybe what you call access arrangements. So the school kind of know that child needs extra time, maybe reading, maybe ascribe technology spag on in their exams. They might then get through A levels. But, the other week we had somebody at Moonhall Assessment Centre, adults, who just entered university, was at a good university in London doing a history degree, and she was dyslexic. And I think, that's where I think a lot of kids trip up, because they might just survive and then they go to university and they don't have that official diagnosis. And they say, well, I had access arrangements. Mrs. Jones gave me access arrangements, the SENCO. And they're like, doesn't matter. You've got to have that piece of paper. So my opinion would be whatever age you are, because, you can apply for disability student allowance, and you can get a lot of help. And, you just won't get your additional time or anything like that unless you've got that official diagnosis.
Yeah, it's a point of contention at the moment as well, because when I was 17 when I got picked up as dyslexic, because my lowest grade, okay, I sound like I'm bragging and it's not, my worst grade at GCSE was an A, so I'm not an underachiever. I absolutely I destroyed myself in the process for that. I absolutely worked my socks off. My mental health was, by the time I got to A-level maths, I couldn't read the question. I could decode the question, but I couldn't. It's like, what? Like, it was the mechanicsy bit, so the physicsy bit of maths, because I did engineering first time around because I liked hitting stuff. Like, you had to draw these little force diagrams, free body diagrams. I was like, like I would sit in class and bawl, and that hits you. And I'm clever, I'm articulate. Not everybody has that. So you can get these kids that sit in the back of the classroom just feeling horrific about themselves, or kind of go, what? And kind of are a clown and really well liked, but they don't engage because they can't. It's a really dyslexia and ADHD quite often as well. Like, all of the specific learning difficulties, they're so coincident that you just get these kids, people at all stages of life who just have a really hard time.
Is there a correlation between dyslexia and ADHD?
Yes.
I
think it was. I want to say it was somebody, Amanda Kirby, I think it was. There was something I saw on LinkedIn, and it was either that 30% of ADHDers have dyslexia or 30% of dyslexics have ADHD. I can't remember. But if you Google, there is a neurodiversity diagram by Mary Colley.
Yeah.
It's on like a thing from Essex or something, and it shows like all the crossovers in this Venn diagram. It's the most useful diagram in the history of man to just show people like how it all fits together. There's so much crossover.
But the bottom line is there's a crossover there.
Yes,
sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what might dyslexia look like at different stages of a child's education then? Because you mentioned early years, we've touched on secondary, A level, right? So, are the differences that a teacher might need to look out for, or is it similar traits all the way
I
through?
think Helen's made a really good point of don't underestimate the clever kid who's doing okay, because that could be the clever kid that could do fantastically. And sometimes you say to a teacher, well, they're dyslexic, and they're like, no, they're not. They can read, they can write. It's like, well, actually, they're super clever. What they can articulate is totally different from what they can get down on paper. And they might look age related. They might have a standard spelling score that's in the average range. They might even be maybe even a bit higher in their reading age than their actual age. It doesn't necessarily mean they are not dyslexic. If you get into the nuts and bolts of looking at a child's phonics, of looking at their processing speed, looking at their working memory, and if you can see, like Helen says, that spiky profile, that's a dyslexic person, and I think we get fooled that these are people that can't read or write, but it's like the comprehension. They're spending so much time decoding. They don't understand a word that they've read, because all their effort's gone on decoding. So they can read, but they can't read, if you know what I mean. So if they've read something, they put so much effort into decoding that they haven't understood what they've read. So I think it's really important not to just say, oh, well, they're okay. And I think I get a lot of parents who come to me and say, I know there's something wrong, but the teacher says they're all right. And as a parent, you don't want your child to be all right. You want your child to be doing the best that they can. So I think, I would say, obviously we've spoken about nursery, we've spoken about secondary school. I would say, in primary school, a child that, is reluctant to read, a child that maybe their comprehension is a little bit dodgy. So, they can read it, but they haven't processed it properly. Can they understand something that's being read to them better than if they've read it themselves? That's a classic one. And then, dodgy spelling, and sometimes we see dodgy spelling all the way through, and it's like, have you spelt that word wrong 5 times in the same piece of writing?
And differently, they'll spell it wrong differently as well, like not the same. That was and it's
so is the spelling thing all the way through? Is that or does it? Are you saying the spelling part presumably can improve by secondary age, or
it depends. It depends on the child. It depends on what support they're given. Like my spelling's absolutely fine. It's never been writing for me. I'm all right writing. Spelling's fine. You ask me to read something, no. So there's different manifestations, I would say, of dyslexia. And some of it's personality, some of it's like the environment kids are in or people are in. Some of it's the support, the kind of there's an emphasis at the moment in this SASC, the updated paperwork from our professional body, around the kind of culture around literacy at home as well, which is huge. That kind of, and it links to this notion of cultural capital, which is like a huge thing. So it's a really broad thing, and I think you've met one dyslexic person, you've met one dyslexic person. Like it's really tricky to. There are generalities, and Lucy's absolutely nailed it with the kind of spelling stuff like that. But equally, there are nuances. But the classic is really verbally great, can't get it on paper or can't read it.
Sure. And in terms of the diagnosis part of dyslexia, is there a formal diagnosis process in place that let's say a school SEN department says, we think this person's got dyslexia, right? What are sort of best practices in that regard in terms of the diagnosis of dyslexia?
So in school, I live in Wiltshire. Wiltshire on Thursday this week's just had a really big celebration of Wiltshire's dyslexia-friendly schools stuff. If you Google it, it's all over the place. There's some awesome practice in Wiltshire. The SEN team in Wiltshire, they are wonderful. They are as qualified as I am to assess dyslexia, but they can't because they haven't got enough people. So most local authorities, if they do acknowledge dyslexia properly, haven't got capacity to assess. Schools can't often afford to pay for somebody to assess.
Yeah.
LA educational psychologists don't often diagnose. Why? I honestly don't know. There's not.
I think I do. I think I was a state school SENCO for years, and I think, you know, you have your priorities. You have your 8 or 10 EP visits, and you know, you're going to be more interested in the kid that's maybe displaying behaviour where they're running off or being violent, or, you know, causing everybody a big headache, instead of that child that's, you know, maybe just struggling a little bit with reading and writing. And you know, how are you going to spend your precious EP hours? Plus local authority EPs, they don't like to diagnose dyslexia because local authorities don't like to give EHCPs to dyslexia. Okay, that you will always find an EP report from a local authority saying literacy difficulties. Well, isn't that dyslexia? Slow
yes.
Working memory, but they will not. Some of those local authority EPs will not put dyslexia. And you know, schools have got really limited budgets. So unfortunately, I would say that would you get a dyslexia diagnosis through the local authority? Very rare. Yeah. So I would say what people do is they go for a private assessment. So that can be with a specialist assessor like Helen, and you know, they can have that assessment, or with an educational psychologist. So they can both diagnose dyslexia. You don't have to have an updated report. That will stay with you for the rest of your life.
If the assessor has a particular piece of paper, there's a called an APC. That's
And is that diagnostic process regulated? So on your part, Helen, for example, and I know I'm not questioning your qualifications.
No, absolutely, it matters.
I think you know, is there regulation in terms?
There is in terms of, so anybody can call themselves a specialist assessor. However, the piece of paper that matters for my profession is a thing called an APC, which is an assessment practicing certificate, and that's SASC is kind of the boss people of that. And to claim disabled students allowance, a student would have to have a report done by somebody like me and who has an APC or an appropriately registered educational psychologist. So that's the regulatory process. I would argue entirely that it could become like a protected profession, like psychology, and I would argue that almost it should be, because we are giving out diagnoses for life. You know, if you're an OT, if you're a medical bod, you are entirely regulated job title wise. I think my one probably should be. I don't know who I'd argue with about that. I'll have to find out, but yeah.
But I understand that if you're a specialist assessor like you are, you have to update and submit a couple of your reports
every 3 years,
so that they can see that you're keeping up to date with everything, and everything's you know, so they can update you. With an educational psychologist, you've got to be very careful and make sure that they're educational psychologists, not a clinical psychologist. A clinical psychologist looks at ADHD, autism. Some clinical psychologists will like to say, I can do you a whisk and a wire and diagnose dyslexia. They can, but they're being a little bit naughty. So you need an educational psychologist who's HCPC registered. Okay, as long as they got the HCPC registration, then you're home and dry. So either a specialist assessor with the APC, or an educational psychologist with the HCPC.
Healthcare Professionals Council, I think it stands for.
Healthcare Professional Council, yeah. And obviously, if they do something wrong, you can report them to their registered body. So it's regulated as well. But yeah, I would say, you know, the big thing for a lot of families is affordability. You know, if you've got 2 kids, you know, we know what the cost of living is like. You know, for some people, it's a real middle class assessment. And that's why at Moon Hall, we decided that we would give people bursaries for their assessment. So, you know, Helen's works at Moon Hall Assessment Centre. You know, we've given some children completely free assessments, or 50% off, depending on their family's affordability.
Yeah, I do, where I can.
And you know, that's a good thing, but there's not many people out there. Obviously, you know, professionals like Helen need to work, so you know, and they need to earn a living. But what we have done at Moon Hall is taken our surplus, because we're a charity, and put some of the surplus back into, you know, giving people those assessments. So, you know, I would encourage anybody, if you're really worried about any of your kids, any of your kids at school, just ask the parents to come and email us, and we do the very best that we can to give as much money as we can off the basic financials.
And if you're not like within reach of Surrey, there's organisations like Helen Arkell and the British Dyslexia Association, not the British Dental Association, the British Dyslexia Association. They do bursaries as well. So if like Surrey is not feasible, if you live in like Northumberland, it's probably a bit tricky. There are bursaries, and it's a really bleak landscape if you're not with money.
There's also a charity that also funds called Parents in Need. And they will give people, they've funded a couple of or half funded some assessments at Moon Hall, and they will do any SEN assessment. So because you get a lot of people, sometimes their children are quite complex. They need a dyslexia assessment, they need an autism assessment, they need an ADHD assessment, and people they're expensive. They just run out of money. So Parents in Need has been one that I've been really impressed with.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Sorry, I'm just going to cut in. So, are there any sort of common misconceptions about dyslexia then that people have that?
Yeah, you can't read and you can't spell at all. That's what.
Or that you grow out of it. Like, ask Andy Ross, Mr. Dr. Ross, bless him. I've got the most patient husband in the world. I like the working memory and processing speed for me. So I will be, if he's talking to me, I'm like looking at him like, what? I will not understand what he said. Or when I'm sent to the shop, or if he's asked me to do something, it goes in one ear and out the other. And it's been the same since I was little. I have no idea. If I've written down some of the things you've said, if I don't write it down, it doesn't exist. Like, so by the time I get to the shop, Andy always sends me like a text of what I need to buy because I don't ever.
Working memory is usually quite dodgy. So, if you said to a child, okay, I'd like to go out, I'd like you to mix some purple paint, some green paint and some yellow paint, they'd probably remember the purple paint and not the green and the yellow. Okay. So it's that kind of the child who is listening, isn't being naughty, isn't, ignoring you. Yeah, right. She's asked you to get some paint. Oh, purple paint. I can't remember the other two paints. And for a teacher, that's quite frustrating. But and you can see that a lot with ADHD kids as well. Yes. That they have quite poor working memories, or they catch the first thing and then the other two or three things. So it's about giving people very simple single instructions, giving people hooks to hook on. So if you are a teacher, maybe write on the board, this is what I want, purple, yellow and green, or give children some visuals. And, they are quite life-changing for some kids, really. And, they don't do the other kids any harm in the class because, there's a couple of kids there that need them. I'm sure there's a few more that haven't been listening or got ADHD and need that reminder as well. So, and also, the processing speed, sometimes with some kids, you're talking to them and you can almost, I always say, you can hear the cogs go round.
Oh, yeah.
and you know, they're desperately trying to take it in, they're desperately concentrating on you. And I'm quite a natural fast talker, and when I think about 20 years ago when I first started teaching, oh my goodness, you know, and I'm quite a fast person. I think, oh my goodness, I really needed just to slow down, put everything really clearly to the kids, and you know, and also give them, you know, those reminders, those visuals. And I think that's what if you're not dyslexic and you've got a bit of a fast brain like I have, you don't understand until you actually look into dyslexia that, oh, you know, these kids, they do actually, you know, they do need a bit of extra time to process.
But I think that was what was quite nice when because my last teaching job was at Stonehenge School, just at Amesbury by Stonehenge, bizarrely enough. Like, I know, clues in the name, but like working there, all my kids knew that I'm dyslexic. So when it came to me marking their work, they're like, Doctor, what have you written, Dr. Ross? I was like, don't know, let's have a look. But the kids would always know, like, or spelling the word Wednesday, they would see me go wed next day. Or like, and I think that was quite nice. One of the things I think, if you're a teacher and you're confident, like obviously you share of yourself what you're comfortable with. And, you know, because I'm an open book. I'm very, very frank about everything I wobble with. There's no point for me, from my perspective, not being. But like, and when I was a SENCO at a little school just near Bath as well, because I was a SENCO before kind of doing my own thing. And I was always very frank about the fact that, like, just stop talking for a moment. Let me as the teacher listen to you, so I've understood. And when you've got two kids talking at you, like, so I would be very frank with the kids. Look, do I look like I can follow what you're saying? I can't. And it actually meant that, like, it was such a nice thing, because the kids would be like, we'd all be really aware of each other's needs. And I think that was a really privileged place to be in as a teacher, because the kids at Stonehenge are just gorgeous. The kids at Stonehenge were they are absolutely lovely kids. And I think one of the things that is nice as a myth to bust is that you grow out of it. You know, I'm like, no. And no, I do not like reading. No, I will not tell the children they must read for pleasure, because I hate it. I read for work. I clearly read for work. I do not read for pleasure. And I think that's something that actually, that honesty is important, because yes, dyslexia can be a superpower. It can also be a pain.
Got you.
And I think, you know, I mean, at our school at Moon Hall, I mean, all the children have a primary need of dyslexia. And, you know, it's so nice for them, because they're not the only child in the school that has problems with reading, or needs a reader or a scribe, or they, you know, need a laptop. And you know, after we get some children that are quite broken, you know, because they feel, oh, you know, my needs weren't met, you know, I was stuck in the corner, or the teacher didn't know what to do with me. And you know, I'm the only kid in the class that can't do it. I feel stupid. And then they come to Moon Hall, and within sometimes days, they're like, oh, you know, this is amazing. I'm not the only person. And I almost call it like they're with their tribe. You know, they're with other people that are exactly like them, and it makes them feel much more secure within themselves.
But I think,
just to play devil's advocate there, Lucy, though, that's possibly not going to apply to a lot of kids in those mainstream settings who, for whatever reason, don't have access. So, sorry, Helen, did you want to? Exactly that.
That's where, and I think, and I'm very mindful that on paper, the policy of adaptive teaching looks great. I've written a load of stuff about it recently, actually, and one of my jobs is to write 3 more papers about it this summer. But this adaptive teaching, so, and actually scanning pens, who we know sort of through various professional networks. There's a lady called Julia Clouter, who is a real champion of a toolkit approach to literacy. Her toolkit is, I don't really know how she came up with it, but what the philosophy behind this toolkit, and it really connects very strongly to adaptive teaching, is like universal design for learning, where different ways of doing stuff are normalized within a classroom. So it might be that some kids need like a wobble cushion to sit on, or some kids are going to write in green pen because that works with their vision. Some kids are going to type. So on paper, provision where different ways of doing the same thing is normalized, so everyone has their approach and nobody stands out because everyone's a bit quirky and a bit different in a classroom, is brilliant. And in a mainstream setting, it can be really powerful. And that's sort of the most recent ECT frameworks kind of really trump this. And there's some really good work on it when it's adequately resourced, when the culture in a school fits it. Delta Academy's Trust, actually, their director of SEND, Becca Caddy, is gorgeous. She is rolling this out. I've done quite a lot of work with them over the last, I think, 3 years, I think it is, a good couple of years. Because some of my old colleagues from when I worked in Barnsley with Delta up in Yorkshire and sort of Humber. So adaptive teaching, when led by culture change, can really address this kind of finding their tribe, because everyone's not like, what have you got green paper, or what, because everyone just has their own way.
But are you saying, so adaptive teaching for me is where the teacher changes their approach. I suppose it's the new phrase for differentiation. But
no, because
that's my cynical Tom Rogers word.
Absolutely.
Now, but
no.
Anyway, but this idea that, you know, each student does. Are you saying it's each student does their own thing? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's basically, and it is absolutely contingent on resource. With differentiation, you say this child here is having that means this child, and it differentiates the child so they stand out. Whereas within an adaptive teaching framework where the culture is right, and this is where it's that philosophy that underpins, it means you're not retrofitting a general lesson with a few like walking sticks for a child, for example, because the provision for kids to have access to different ways to do things is built in. You can say to kids, you're going to tell me about photosynthesis. Tell me, here are the things you need to include. And the kids just do it how they're going to do it, as opposed to, I want 5 sides of A4 five PowerPoint slides about photosynthesis. Here, Johnny, here's your piece of paper. You can do it on paper. That's the difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of.
Cool.
Another way of maybe looking at it is, you know, okay, you might say to the dyslexic child, or it might be in a dyslexia report, they need to use a laptop. They need to learn to touch type. They need to write all their extended pieces of writing by word processor. But if everybody in the classroom has a laptop, that kid's not going to look out of place when they switch their laptop on and use Word and the spell check, and maybe plug their earphones in so they can hear what they've read back to them. Sure. And I think, you know, we've got to, there's got to be more investment. You know, technology is a brilliant thing. It's an absolutely brilliant thing. And I think the BDA recommend that by the time you're 12 or 13, that, you know, if you know, stop doing interventions, start using assisted tech, right? Start, you know, putting on immersive reader, start using the SPAG, start dictating. And there's lots of really good programs out there as well. But, you know, if every child in that class had a laptop, and you know, the dyslexic child's just got his bag on, or, you know, he's listening through his...
No one will know.
No one will know. But I think it's when that child is the only child in the class with the laptop on, the only child in the class with the coloured glasses on. That's when kids don't want to look different.
And there's a cost thing as well, because if you've got... There's no money for TAs. Exercise books cost. The online subscriptions cost. Physical, like different coloured paper costs an absolute arm and a leg. I would argue that if you've got kids who have a cheapo, like even just a Chromebook is not massively expensive, but Chromebooks within the operating systems, I'm not an Apple bot. I don't know very much about iPhones and stuff at all, but I know that Google, Chrome, Android, I'm a Windows bot. If you turn on the accessibility features, you don't need to pay anything extra for your computer to read to you, or for me to be able to tell my computer what to write. Sure. It's free.
I mean, a good one on that's Tom Stark, who used to do shows on TTR, and his I remember him banging on about this for ages. About
he's not wrong though. He's not wrong.
All the assistive tech that's built into Microsoft tools, you know. So that's a good point.
And you know, you get lots of old-fashioned people saying, well, they need to learn to handwrite. Yeah, you do need to learn to write your name. You do need to know how to write your Nana Christmas card. You do need to know how to address an envelope. But apart from that, you can do everything else on a laptop. So, you know, or using assisted tech. So all this, they need to learn to write and get your exercise book out. And you know,
what for?
What for? Because, you know, in a GCSE exam, you can type, you can scribe, you can have a scribe. You know, at work, I mean, I'm not dyslexic, but I type all the time. You know, that's,
Sure.
it's a bit like saying, do you know what, you've got a calculator there, but we're not going to let you do it. And you're going to add up these really hard sums because we just want you to do that. And I think technology is our biggest friend at the moment. I really do. And I think if we could get every child in the country a laptop or a Chromebook or something like that, and they could set it up and they could use it in school, I think that would be really transformative. And I'm talking
I don't actually disagree with that, Lucy. However, it is very much against, I guess, not against the trend maybe overall, but there is certainly a sort of a backlash against tech.
I think
that's growing. Mobile phone would be a good example of that.
There's a snobbery, I think, as well, because one must be well read. And I had this chat on Saturday with I had the most gorgeous family who I was working with on Saturday. They bought us donuts, but like we were talking about the notion of being well read versus well informed, because you have to read a book. No, you need to take in information. How you take that information, does it really matter? No. And yes, I understand the concern with smartphones. So I think there's a kind of legislation moves very slowly. Like if cars did what AI did, we'd be like at the other side of the universe by now. And I think the policies are far too specific. They need to be more about general principles, I think. And it's getting past the snobbery of you must be well read. You must have beautiful copper plate handwriting. Well, I'm not an idiot and I write like a dog's dinner. So no. And I think
you're a doctor.
spells dross, don't ever forget that. But like I think there's some real literal fiscal costs that really need to be addressed around where are we spending money. CEOs of academy trusts, I mean, I understand that they need to be paid well. I won't say anything else.
Yeah. Or like, do another show on CEO pay, Helen.
I mean, I've got all the opinions, Tom. They're not always very well informed, so sometimes I do need to be a bit careful. But I think tech is our friend. I totally agree with Lucy.
Okay, we've had a couple of comments which I'll come back to, but I just want to shout out to Debs and Paul who've been sort of commenting. I will come back to some of their comments and questions a bit later on in this conversation. I wanted to move on because there's so much stuff I want to get through, and we've only got through about 3 bullet points. So I wanted to ask, so if we're talking about on a classroom teacher level, and we're thinking about somebody who is teaching in a mainstream classroom with 30 students, and you know a proportion of those students, or even one student in the class, is dyslexic, what would be? Give me some. I like granular, simple, easy to do things that me as a teacher can do on a regular basis that are sort of low cost, high impact strategies. I get that doesn't have to be about what I actually do. It could be about the plan of the actual lessons that I'm putting together. I get that. But have you got anything that you would say if you were to pick out 1 or 2 things?
In your PowerPoint, lots of space. Don't do black on white. Do like a palish, there's no definite best background. So use like just an off-white. I use pale pink because I like pale pink. I like pale pink. There is no other reason. And then with a sans serif font, so like a font, something like, is it Aptos, the new one, or like Calibri, without the little twiddly bits that are on Times New Roman, because they just make it right faff to read. And just bullet points, not big wadges of prose, because then you're not bombarding
and I think
people.
that's quite important as well with your worksheets. You know, I've seen worksheets that are, you know, the teachers try to stuff as much as they can onto them, and you know, like Helen says, you know, it's like 0.5 spacing, and even, you know, if you're not dyslexic, that's pretty hard to read. You know, sometimes for kids, those coloured overlays, you can have like a load of those in class. Sometimes, you know, the younger kids love that because they, you know, even if it's a psychological thing, you know, that's fine. And then they're pennies, they're not expensive. But yeah, you know, think about the layout of your worksheets, and sometimes just, you know, allowing a child I was a primary school teacher, you know, putting the learning objective. That dyslexic child who's a little bit slower is going to take about 5-10 minutes to do the learning objective. that's not helping us. That's not showing me what the child knows. That's just copying, you know. Write it for them or print it out. You know, the best bit of advice I had was print out your learning objectives, stick it all in their books and get them going with the learning. And like Helen said, you know, there's lots of different ways that you can show what you know. So, you know, instead of saying, right, I'd like you to write about the Romans or the Tudors, you know, could you do a Tudor house? Could you show us, could you build a model of a Tudor house? You know, could you, instead of writing what's inside a Tudor house, you know, if that child knows what they know, they'd be able to show it really beautifully. You know, can they do it in a picture? We're testing their historical knowledge there, aren't we? Not their literacy knowledge. And I think that's what we sometimes get confused with, you know, that everything has to be written and everything has to be like an essay. It doesn't. So I think that's one of the other things is think around the box a bit. Can I get this child, especially in primary school, to think more creatively about how they can show me what they know?
I absolutely agree with that.
It's interesting, circling back, Helen, sorry, to what you were saying about reading is, you know, reading is such a big, you know, you only have to look around teaching and learning and you'll come across the word reading straight away. I'm not saying that's wrong, but what you were saying about different ways to digest content, I think is and different ways to display what you know is actually a really, you know, it's an important point, isn't it? I think from what you're saying.
Your phrase digest content, that is beautiful. I'm going to blow my own trumpet for a minute. I've just been awarded a Churchill Fellowship and it only went live like 10 days.
Oh, congrats.
Like 10 days ago, I lose track. I've slept since then. One of the things that's, obviously I'm quite an academic researcher. I'm a doctor, all that stuff. One of the beautiful things, and your digest content chimed with that, is one of the things that you're distilling knowledge. You don't have to go and write like all the papery stuff. And actually I don't know how I feel about this just because I'm quite boring with how I show my knowledge. I'm very righty and typey. We as professionals, as proper grown-ups doing like not, you know, fairly clever stuff, we can do a blog as our report. We can do videos. We've got the option to stick it on. And I have actually registered for all the report writing, for all the report producing webinars. I have no idea for myself. For kids, I don't care. For me to do like a video report, I'm like, it's terrifying. But I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that because we're distilling knowledge. Well read is just steeped in class-based, kind of really class-based sort of historically hegemonic discourses that come out of the Victorian times. I've got a bit of an opinion about that.
I suppose the exam system we have, though, it does require, you know, quite rigid, well, in most cases, quite rigid sort of ways of, because they have to sit in an exam hall in the end and write it down. You know, well, actually, there are exceptions.
I heard something, and Lucy, you may know more than me, that apparently they're on about that they're trying to make it so you can do spoken exams at some point. I also might have made that up and dreamt it. But I heard something.
It could be true. I have no idea. That sounds.
I know that they're looking for doing a lot of exams now online eventually. But I think, you know, at the moment, it is unfortunate. I think for dyslexics, things like BTECs lend themselves much better. Where they can do.
They're moving to exams now. Andy is having this problem with his work. They're all moving to exams.
So a little and often, but you know, what can we put in place at the moment? We have got the system we've got. You all sit down at the end, even at Moon Hall, you all sit down at the end and you all do an English and Maths and Science GCSE. And what I think people have got to think about is how can we get the children to show what they know? Right. So I'm an access arrangements assessor as well. So is Helen. Yeah. And I do all the kids at my school. And basically, you know, do they need a reader? Do they need scribe or the equivalent spelling and punctuation put on their on Word? Do they need reading technology? Do they need extra time? Do they need a rest breaks? And, you know, that can make a difference between a child getting a 3 and getting a high 4 or maybe a 5. You know, at Moon Hall, and this is very unusual and it's very difficult because we've got small numbers, but our kids like us sitting next to them. So, you know, I will spend a lot of the GCSEs reading and scribing for a kid. Obviously, if you've got cohorts of 200, you ain't going to do that. You know, we know that. But could you give that child reading technology, dictation technology, get them used to it, right? If they've got rubbish handwriting, that's an easy access arrangement to get. You don't even have to apply to the board to go on a laptop with the SPAD not enabled. So, there's lots of things that you can do just to give those children a fair playing field. It's not to be an advantage. It's not an advantage on access arrangement. It's a fair playing field.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd second that, because so often, like, when I've just chatting to parents, because obviously, this is where I spend my entire working life when I'm not sort of on a little day trip out somewhere else. But one of the things that there's not a polite word, so that's all I'll say. But like, you had so many families say, "Oh, well, the school don't want him to have a laptop because it's not fair on the other kids." I'm like, you're under the Equality, and I don't think schools realise they are literally under the Equality Act. They're an institution. If they have policies that negative kids or that disadvantage a kid, which that would be one, you're under the Equality Act. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Yeah. And if schools get these things wrong, now reasonable adjustments has to be a bit woolly, because different schools, different cohorts, different budgets, different settings, it matters that they're adaptable. But there's a lot of legal responsibility. And on a SENCO, SENCOs it's such a hard job. It broke me in the end. I will be quite frank about that. I have so much respect for it. But the responsibility on SENCOs, and actually also on staff, on class teachers, you have to make reasonable adjustments. If you don't, it's a potential lawsuit. Worst case scenario.
That's the same with access arrangements. It's also illegal not to give somebody the access arrangements that they're entitled to, as well as giving them the wrong access arrangements. Yeah. So, going back to the SENCO, there is a lot of responsibility put on the SENCO, and a lot of teachers will think, well, that's the SENCO's job. But every teacher, I know it's an old saying, every teacher is a teacher of SEN. They are. If that child is in your classroom, you have responsibility for them, and you cannot shove them over to the TA, to Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Smith. You are responsible for their education. And I think, that's something that we've got to really enforce in teachers and, teacher training. I had 4 hours SEN training, and I was on a 4-year course. And that's why I went back to university, and I did a master's, and did lots of other courses. But that's why it's so important, for teachers to get the right training. We had the Rose Report in 2009. There should be a specialist dyslexia teacher in every school. We're now in 2025, and that has not happened. And
that entire humans that's like, that's a GCSE cycle, isn't it? 16 years.
What did you think? I haven't seen it, by the way, but what did you think of the Jamie Oliver thing? I haven't seen it, but
I didn't watch it. I was the day it was on
either.
The day it was on,
I thought you guys would have watched that. Come on,
I've been abroad. I haven't got iPlayer.
The day it was on, I was at Parliament at an all-party parliamentary group for dyslexia. So when it was on...
All right, Helen, all right. That's the reason you didn't watch. I didn't watch it because I was Prime Minister. I was really busy with
picking a police officer at Parliament. I bent over and kicked somebody by accident. They were so gracious. No, so I was in the car on the way home when it was on. And actually, do you know what? It's like, I live, eat, sleep, breathe dyslexia. I can't watch it. My friend, when I was doing my PhD, one of my friends was working in prisons, working with mothers in prison. Orange is the New Black was the latest thing. She's like, I just can't. And I never got it at the point. And I'm just like, no, I just can't manage. When I watch silly things on telly, we watched all the silly stuff on Netflix because we need to unwind. But I love that Jamie Oliver did it. One of the people in Wiltshire was actually quite well involved with that, and Ellen Brumey from the British Dyslexia Association as well. I saw her and she was in Wiltshire on Thursday. And I love that Jamie Oliver did it, because whether you love him or loathe him, and I think he's kind of cool, he puts his heart on the line. He gives of himself when he does these things, and he's raising awareness. We don't need our awareness raising, like we preaching to the converted, but what he's done is he's put it back in the spotlight again, and I really, really like that. So
sure. You mentioned the training there. So, what do we need to do to sort of get dyslexia on the map when it comes to initial teacher training, ECTs.
It's not just dyslexia, it's SEN. I wrote on this. So in 2020, just before COVID kicked off, I'm sorry in advance, I got a call from the Office for Science and Technology. I thought they were taking the mickey. I was like, do you mean me? And I got asked to write a review of how kids with dyslexia are supported. So this is 2020, and we had time because COVID kicked off when this project really got going. So what I found then, it was a 2018 report from Ofsted said, teacher training around SEN is very, very sporadic and very bitty. Ofsted are the people that are in charge of this. Ofsted didn't make any difference. I'm working with colleagues at the moment at Liverpool John Moores. They are like Peterwood, Elizabeth Malone is at Manchester Met. They're involved in teacher training. They are very good at SEN training, those two, at their unis, because they do it. There's a lady at the Institute of Education who's very good at it because she does it. But it's so patchy because the guidelines are just so blooming woolly. They're so woolly around all SEN. So yes, obviously dyslexia is close to
why is that? Why are the guidelines woolly around SEN then?
I don't know, and it makes me
because that's with respect, that's not a finance thing, is it?
No,
it's the reason those guidelines are woolly. Wouldn't
do you know what I think it is? I think it's academics who are setting the agenda. So I did a talk at Roehampton University to some SENCOs, and I thought, what would I want to know when I was training to be a SENCO? What do I want to know? And I thought, yes, this is what I would like to know. How to run an annual review, how to deal with a difficult parent, how to, what were the legal guidelines and the legal frames? How would I apply for an EHCP? All that. And as soon as I got up and I went, and this is how you're going to do an annual review in 45 minutes, I could tell you could have heard a pin drop. That is exactly what they wanted. I said, I've done hundreds of annual reviews, right? You know, it was bread and butter work for me. And you could have had a pin drop. And I said, look, this is the agenda you need. These are the reports that you need before. No one needs any surprises if we're going to, change things. And I said, if you get all this information, the information from the child, because sometimes they don't want to attend, information from parents beforehand as well, you can run an annual review in 45 minutes. Not every annual review is going to be like that, because you're going to have some people that will want to talk a lot. Some people will have issues. But, I would say my average annual review was 45 minutes to an hour.
It had to be. No workload. It had to be.
Yeah. But, you have some people, they have annual reviews that go on for 2-3 hours. But I think if you're able to tighten things up a bit, and you get a lot of SENCOs that, are very well-meaning, but they're fed lies by their local authorities. Oh, the child needs to be 2 years behind to have an EHCP. No. Oh, the child needs to have a diagnosis to have an EHCP. No, the child there's 2 rules to get an EHCP, 2 criteria. One is that the child has or may have a special educational need. And the second one is, and that they need provision that's additional to and different from that's ordinarily available.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Those are the only, it's very, very low threshold. Right, so if you can prove that, you should be able to get an EHCP through.
I didn't know that. I mean, I knew because there's been an increase in EHCPs.
Mm-hmm.
I know that. I mean, do you think that's a good thing? I know maybe that's a silly question there, but I mean, you know, I
think it's a sign of the times, because there's so little money in the system, and I don't know, you have hopes for the current admin in power, don't you, that they would have done something more. But I think so where kids are wobbling, and I think that there are more complicated kids in mainstream, because like even just up the road from me there was a special school, now there's not, and they're moving it, they're condensing things, and so there are fewer places in special schools, which for some children is what they need and it's what they want. There are more children with very complex needs because medical care is improving, so there's a perfect storm. And then so classrooms are more complex because of these. There's fewer places in mainstream. So where kids do really need bespoke, really complex provision, if you need an EHCP to fund it, and schools, because most schools haven't got somebody like me, and Stonehenge was quite odd in that I was there. Some schools have speech therapists, like there's a school in Bath that's got the most wonderful speech therapist who's in their SEN department. That's random.
I mean, in terms of, because I was going to ask a question about if you had a big budget. So if you were a MAT CEO, if you had a couple of schools and you had a budget, and you thought to yourself, you know what, I'm going to use a chunk of this budget I'm going to focus on dyslexia, right? And I'm going to just do something maybe not radical, but I'm going to really go for it. I'm going to go for it on this. Give me an example of what would be something silly to do. I mean, you've already mentioned Chromebooks, which sounds... Right,
something silly to do would be to put 15 kids in a class. And that's how you're going to repair the education system, because 30 is too much. Okay, so, right. You know...
So you're talking about structural change.
Structural change,
students, really.
You know, 15 in a class... What a really stupid thing would be, maybe a really expensive thing would be maybe having a specialist teacher in. Maybe paying for you know, the staff to have dyslexia training.
I think disseminate it, get it wide rather than...
But you know, I think getting the technology in for older kids is really important. I think,
and teaching them to use it. Because I had a boy today's boy, just lovely, today's boy has access to an iPad.
I
don't know what to do with it. I don't use Apple products, and I told him, you can talk to your phone. And I've never used it. My dad worked at IBM. I've never used an Apple product. I don't know how to do it. So, and I think a really silly thing to do would be to buy really expensive high-end computers of some description and just leave them sat in the corner, which is what's happened with so many of the laptops from COVID. They've just sat in the corner.
Sure, but this is what I mean, though. I mean, how do you prevent that from happening?
Training. You get somebody in who is a tech specialist. Moon Hall's got one. There's a gentleman called Miles.
David Curran's our AT guy, and we actually give all our children from the age of year 3 up until year 11 an assisted tech lesson every week.
Right. Okay.
So they will learn how to use, you know, the dictation, the reading software, reading pens. You know, they will learn how to touch type, and they can get a qualification in it as well. So, you know, I think obviously there's, I mean, you know, dyslexic kids do generally, you know, do they want to learn a foreign language, modern foreign language? I know you have got it, Helen. I know you have.
I'm an oddbod with that. I'm nosy. That's why.
But generally, you know, why make a child who's dyslexic or possibly dyslexic and hates French, hates Spanish? Why put them through that misery? Why don't you just get them and put them in assisted tech instead?
And I would say as well, there's a real myth actually, and this is a real bee in my bonnet that I've got. There's this notion that, we can't let the kids drop a subject because they've got to have a broad curriculum. If you've got a broad curriculum where the kid is on their knees, they are not accessing all their subjects. Text them off them, give them a couple of hours where they can go and sit in the library, do their work, do whatever, and free the brain space.
7 good GCSEs is better than 10 rubbish ones.
And we did that. We were one of the privileges of being in the private sector when I was at Stonor, it's just near Melksham, was if a kid was really wobbling, you go, what can we shave off your workload? What can we big? So with the kids to do their horse exams, I don't really know anymore, horse exams. They do their lambda, they do all the other stuff that was of value to them. They do maths, English, a couple of sciences. They do 5 or 6 GCSEs alongside the stuff that for these kids was of value. So they weren't on their knees. They were well. They were what they were doing well, happily. And why? And I don't know. I think it's a fear of Ofsted. It takes absolute cojones of steel to say, no, Ofsted, I'm doing this because so that in order to. It's really hard. And local authorities are really weird about kind of kids having a personalised curriculum as well. But you're destroying kids potentially by making them do everything.
Just pause there. I'm just going to give a massive shout out to John Catt Educational again, who are our sponsors on the show tonight. So if you are after a book, a professional development book, then head over to the John Catt Bookshop, johncattbookshop.com, and you can get 20% off any and all books on there by using the code JCTTR2425. So take advantage. Also, I was going to mention a podcast that I've been enjoying recently by Anna Stokey called Chalk and Talk. Have you heard of that one, guys?
I'm not very good at podcasts. I never remember to listen to them.
Well, you will be after this, because you should head over there to the Chalk and Talk podcast by Anna Stokey. That's Stokke. She does lots of interviews with people who are mainly discussing evidence-informed practice in all areas. I think a couple of weeks ago she interviewed Nick Gibb, which is an interesting one. So check out Chalk and Chalk. Just
written it down.
Podcast. And also, if you want even more than that, go to the Teachers Talk Radio website /newsletter. Put in your email address, and you can get our newsletter every week. And no doubt this show will feature in there this weekend. So, pick up the newsletter. But anyway, moving on, I wanted to ask you next about TAs. I mean, we've sort of touched on this, but we'll do a brief section on this. But I wanted to ask you about TAs, non-specialist TAs. I mean, just,
general
TAs, general TAs. Who may not have had the sort of training that you've been talking about. What should and shouldn't a TA be doing with a student who has dyslexia?
Right. Your TA should not be teaching the weakest students. Your most qualified person should be teaching your weakest students, okay? And that's probably a mistake that, people made when I first started teaching. Oh, Mrs. Jones can look after, these 6, and I'll look after the rest of the class. Those children are your responsibility. And, they need the best quality teaching, not no disrespect to TAs. I've had some fantastic TAs, and, sometimes, you can't do the job without them. But I would say, if you've got the weakest learner, they've got to be with the best teacher, and you've got to make sure that they're actually having really precision teaching by somebody who knows what they're doing. By all means, you can get TAs that can go and do the dyslexia level 3, the dyslexia level 4, 5, and get a better understanding. But I think you've got to think about, what is this person's skill? Is this person's skill very good to be with autistic kids that need talking down? Or is this person's skill, is this person interested in dyslexia? I think it's very, very important as a SENCO to think, where are the skills in my team and where should they be deployed? Because, you can have some fantastic TAs that can do some fantastic literacy intervention. And then you've got some other fantastic TAs that will be great with, an autistic kid that's having a meltdown, or the kid that's, needs to have some support because they've got ADHD or something like that. So I think, you've got to think very cleverly about where you put your TA with the child, or the class. And that is so vital. But yeah, that's what I would say, is that, there has been research about TA impact, and that was quite a while ago as well. I think it's the way you use your TA and how you monitor the impact of the TA as well.
And I think with the notion of impact, it's really, really important to decide before you send somebody in. So if you've got X, Y, Z as your aims for working with the child, how are you going to know they've been met before you even start anything? It's about having those success criteria kind of embedded and being monitored. And I think Lucy's absolutely right. It's that strategic overview. I've just written, actually, I've been really lucky enough to have written one of the MPQ SENCO module, a couple of the MPQ SENCO modules. And it was really interesting.
What I want to know, Helen, is how to do an annual review in 45 minutes.
I've had feedback. I wrote what I was told to write. No, but it's more practical than the NSENCO. The
SENCO, yeah.
Yeah, and my SENCO was run well. It was run very well. The team at Bedfordshire were brilliant, but the framework was very dry. But I think it's really, really important to know what are you looking at and why. What's the point of what you're doing? Because it's very easy to go, oh, kiddo's wobbling with their phonics, we'll just stick them on Nessie. When do you take them off Nessie? And what if Nessie doesn't do anything? Then what? So it's having the kind of flow chart of success criteria and monitoring in your head.
Yeah. You know, what does that child know before the intervention? What do they know afterwards? So, you know, are you going to do a reading test or a phonics check or something like that? How do you know that impact's going to be successful or impactful? And, you know, the worst thing you can do is keep on doing something that's not working.
Yeah, death by phonics, man. It's just not helpful.
You know, I mean, okay, I'm not very good at phonics. I'm going to give you more phonics, and then I'm going to give you more phonics and more phonics and more phonics. And I kind of
how does phonics fit in with dyslexia? Is that?
It's weird. So phonics is one element of teaching reading. There's a woman called Louise Selby. She's got curly hair and she's sunshine on a stick. Her sort of real thing that she does is morphology. And morphology is part of how English is built together. It's kind of bits of words that you glue together. And then phonics is this. So morphology is kind of suffixes, prefixes, those bits. So like ing, ed, pre, post, that kind of stuff. Phonics is sound shaped and sized chunks of words. Because English isn't phonetic. You speak Spanish, don't you? I think Spanish is beautiful because a is always a. German is wonderful because a is always a. English is a bit stupid. So phonics by itself doesn't work. Understanding morphology, etymology, so the history of words is really important with English as well. You need all of these tools. But at the moment, the way sort of reading frameworks are written by from the DFE, it's all about systematic synthetic phonics, which is just we must do phonics, and it doesn't give a lot of room for other stuff, but you need the other stuff because English is not phonetic. English is just a bit silly.
I mean, look at the word the, that's phonetically, or said, you know, and those are very common words that, you know, but you know, the amount of times that you see, you mean the word bath,
but exactly that, the word bath or bath. English is really silly. This is an ongoing debate we have, but it's
happy days. Open the can of worms there. But I in terms of the because just to sort of circle back a little bit onto the EHCPs, mentioned about the process. Is dyslexia sometimes seen as separate from the EHCP process?
A lot of people will think that it's hard to get an EHCP with a dyslexia diagnosis.
Because it's not bad
enough. Something else. No, you don't. Right? You can get an EHCP funded by the local authority if you have dyslexia. The best thing that you need to do is to get your child that diagnosis and get somebody who can go to tribunal if you have to go all the way, that can, you know, be your expert witness. So it's basically, it is a fight with the local authority. Some local authorities 30, 40 years ago didn't recognise dyslexia as a need. And I think that's probably still the case with a lot of local authority SEN departments.
Not a serious need or a need at all.
Well, some 40 years ago, a council in London didn't recognise dyslexia as a special need.
Yeah.
Right. And even now, you know, it's like, oh, we're not that worried about those kids. We're more worried about the autistic kids and, you know, the other kids, you know, the kids that are going to be at risk of exclusion that are going to go into the local PRU. You know, we're more worried about those kids than the kids that might. Pardon?
The noisier kids.
Yeah, the kids that make a noise. You know, you've got that nice dyslexic kid who's, you know, he's okay, he's just doing it, he's plodding along, you know, he's working towards expected. We might get him, you know, level, achieving at the right level or whatever for SATs, that's all right. We're more worried about Joey over there who's, kicking off, and, we're thinking that he's at risk of exclusion. That's what we're more worried about. I think, yes, I think if you don't be sold as a teacher or parent when somebody says you can't get an EHCP with dyslexia, because there's about 150 kids at Moon Hall that have got EHCPs with dyslexia.
And actually, and a little lad, I told you I had that thing, didn't I, Lucy, where I was working with quite a complex case. Yeah. It was the case, you cannot ever go into detail, but there was a little lad that I worked with a few weeks ago who they've just won a tribunal case. He's dyslexic. And it's cool. It was so important because dyslexia is not trivial. And I think there's an associate. Oh, you're just not very good at reading. It's fine. No. I'm so grumpy about this, Tom. I'm so sorry. I pull a lot of faces.
No, I get it. I really do get it. I mean, the reason I decided to have this conversation is probably because, I don't know enough about it from a teacher perspective. Being honest, and to be honest with you, if you probably, I can't speak for my colleagues, but I reckon if you went round some of my colleagues, I think they'd be similar to me. Whereas I do agree with you on the point about maybe there is more awareness of other things, or a growing awareness, let's say, of other areas that they seem to have got a lot more attention, maybe. In particularly in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, maybe, than dyslexia. So yeah, makes perfect sense. Listen, we are swiftly running out of time, so we basically run out of time. We've actually gone over what we'd originally said. You guys could talk for England, seriously. It's amazing. Amazing. No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. We've got through loads. Listen, I mean, what I'll say to everybody out there, because a few people have commented as we've gone through as well, so thank you very much for getting involved, and we can check those comments on social media afterwards. I'm sure Helen and Lucy will
just ping us a message on LinkedIn. I'll get back to you.
I think some of them are on LinkedIn, so we can go there. But what I will say is a massive thanks to everybody for listening along and for engaging in the conversation. Hopefully you found something useful from it. We've had nearly 500 people who've clicked to watch or listen during the show, so that's quite nice.
We've probably got more viewers than EastEnders tonight.
That's doubtful. So Helen and Lucy, massive thanks from me.
Thank you for having us.
Time for the conversation. This will be available as a podcast, so if you just started listening in the last 5 minutes and you want to listen back to the whole thing, then it will be sitting on YouTube, but also it'll be available as a podcast as well, for you to get involved with. So Helen, Lucy, have a wonderful evening. Thank you ever so much, and maybe our paths will cross again soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.